Hi, I'm Noah Cadner. I'm a senior writer for American Cinematographer magazine, and I also wrote the virtual production field guide for Epic Games. I'm honored to introduce our panel for today, Lessons from the Front Lines of Virtual Production. Connie Kennedy is the head of Epic Games' LA Lab, where she is responsible for education and industry adoption of Unreal Engine in the film and television industry. She's also an industry veteran who has pioneered virtual production solutions for projects such as The Mandalorian, Westworld, Avengers Endgame, and the VR experience Carne y Harina. Gonzalo Escudero is an executive producer at El Ranchito, a Spanish VFX studio which has worked on shows including Game of Thrones and Westworld. He has worked in visual effects across both North America and Europe for many years and is currently developing a virtual production solution for real-time crowd management. And finally, Jason Chen is a virtual production expert who has been experimenting with these workflows since Avatar in 2009. Last year, he launched Brawn Digital, a new studio designed around virtual production workflows with the goal of bridging the gap between live action and VFX. So some people have a perception, perhaps, that virtual production only really refers to the super high-end LED wall setup like on The Mandalorian, or that you need to be a very technical director like a James Cameron to really engage in virtual production. But what's it really like on the ground today, and what are the different flavors of virtual production, and how easy is it to dive into?
Virtual production is something that's been evolving for a few years now. I think when we started with motion capture and then evolved into using simulcam and now using ICVFX or in-camera visual effects and LED walls, that what we're doing is we're really trying to bring everyone together in real time on the stage at the same time to make decisions that used to take months or years. And I think this is the tools that are being developed now, tools that can be used together with hardware that can be as sophisticated as an LED wall or as simple as a projection screen. And I think this makes it available to anyone who has the creative desire to see their project in real time on a set in a collaborative atmosphere.
Yes, if I may, the part of the question that refers to being a specific kind of filmmaker that's very technologically advanced, it's actually the opposite, because what this brings is the possibility for somebody who's not to be able to be seeing things right there in real time on set. Before, if you had to shoot like a complicated visual effects sequence, you had to imagine what that would be like, just seeing a big green screen in front of you and just try to shoot according to what that might be. Now you can see it right on stage. So it's actually better for the directors who are not very technologically oriented, so to speak.
Yeah, I also agree with what Connie said. Virtual production has also changed, especially in the past year or so, with everybody working from home, with COVID and everyone, in the midst of a pandemic. What virtual production has evolved into is the ability for all sorts of artists to work from everywhere around the world on an international level, but also be connected in one cohesive environment. So what the real-time aspect of this engine really provides is the connectivity and the ability to have creators really see the results of what they have in their brain in the computer screen with a team of people on a Zoom much like this.
An example of the type of project that someone who really doesn't have access to expensive technology, especially LED walls, is something that came from the Unreal Engine Short Film Challenge in Australia recently. A filmmaker, director named Justin Tanner did a short film called Decommissioned. And what he used was something that all of us know, and it's rear projection. And he was able to use rear projection and put the environment of space as the main backdrop to his story. And he used very rudimentary gimbaled kinds of techniques to have his performers float in space. And he created all of this in Engine. It was really quite astounding how incredibly sophisticated it looked when he was working with about a $20,000 budget. And granted, he was drawing from, friendships and favors from people that he knew in the industry. But nonetheless, he was able to create a very sophisticated, beautiful, visually compelling project. And he didn't win the challenge, but he was second. And I have to say, it was very impressive. And it just shows what you can do when you've got a good story, a good concept, and you understand the principles of virtual production.
Yeah, I was going to say, I noticed in the behind the scenes that he used like what looked to be kind of an off the shelf video projector. So, I mean, it's like as if to say, you don't even need to use a very expensive LED wall. If you want to try this out, you can get those kinds of results just using something very off the shelf and inexpensive.
Yeah, whether or not you have a project that's appropriate for that. And I think he was able to understand what the technology was that would work. It isn't something that would work for just anything, but it was ideal for that particular project.
No, I think this was really super interesting because it kind of mirrors a lot of the same techniques that they used on First Man. LED projection for projection mapping and rear projection to help tell the story and help create that sense of movement. And the fact that I didn't even know that he had a budget of $20,000, I think that's insane. And I think more and more of these filmmakers are going to realize that, I can now create worlds. I'm not just stuck with a handy cam in my backyard or stuff like that. They can actually go in and create anything that their imagination can conjure up.
Can you talk a tiny bit about different flavors? Because I think also, obviously Mandalorian is a very flashy show and everybody's really kind of focused on that, but it's one of many different flavors we think of as virtual production. Can you talk a little bit about, some other areas that you're getting into beyond just in-camera visual effects?
Actually, unfortunately, I'm not able to disclose which projects they are because we're actually working on them right now. But we're using this technology in a commercial, really. So it's not like a big, massive show. It's a commercial that's shooting in Europe. And we're using it and we're exploring this technology just to give the director more freedom in terms of pre-visualization of the images that he wants to shoot. And, we have, the LED screens and he's able to see what's going on before shooting. And it's a commercial, really. And also there's another project, and I can't, again, I'm sorry. I would love to say the name of the studio that we're working on with, but we can't because it's a work in progress as well. But we're working on, it's a TV show that shoots in Spain, actually. And we're working on this project to find out whether it's possible to replicate digitally a set so that, say, talent's not available and they could bring this digital set onto the location where the actors are, and maybe be able to shoot them in a virtual environment, as opposed to having to bring them, especially in these times, where COVID is affecting every one of the productions that we have. It's giving the possibility to have another solution to tackling these problems. So, it's not necessarily just the Mandalorian type of setting, which is a great type of setting, but there's also, we're a small company and we're actually working with this technology all the time. So.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. At Braun, our projects are very much not LED screen based yet, but our workflow is very much motion capture centric. So now the ability of that, like very much like that video that Unreal posted at the beginning of the pandemic with a performer in a mocap suit, an XN suit, performing in a living room with all the other components remoting in, all the other operators remoting in. We're actually doing that right now, and we've one of the shows that we have going on is a show called Fables, but we were able to capture in the middle of a pandemic, starting from May of last year, with 4 amazing motion capture performers, an entire 8-episode series. So we're using virtual production and the motion capture techniques and virtual cameras that Connie and I know so well, and everyone does right now, but using it to our advantage and being able to create something from the comfort of your own home and with a quarter of the crew. So right now we're able to successfully do that with an on-set crew of 8 people, including cast.
I think the important thing to recognize is that these tools aren't just at the stage of production. They're really important for the early stages of project development. When you can get into a situation where you're able to do virtual scouting You're able to work with the director, the DP, the editor, and begin to work out all of the problems that would be potentially time consuming and expensive once you get onto the stage. And there's a real opportunity to use these tools in advance in order to find those efficiencies and to be able to solve those problems early on before you get into trouble. Also, the ability to bring in people like the DP, who normally would have had to wait until well into the production process, and to be able to experiment with lighting in these early stages, which is so crucial to the way a film looks. All of these things are quickly coordinated within a virtual environment so that people are able to make those decisions early in the game.
This might be an area that a lot of people watching this are interested in. Can you talk a tiny bit about the new job opportunities that might come up? Because it sounds like, I mean, what I hear is that there's more work than there are people to fill it who have these kinds of qualifications in real time. Can you talk a little bit about how that world of career is changing a bit?
Yes, I think this is really evident with our new fellowship program at EPIC. We opened up the opportunity for people to come onto a fellowship program where we were focused mainly on content development. Because of the pandemic, we weren't able to be in a hands-on environment in production. We realized very quickly that there's a huge appetite for people to transition their skills into working in virtual production from animation and more traditional kinds of work in both pre-production and post-production animation. One thing though is there's a fair amount of training that is going to be required. This is a new workflow. They're new tools. But I think people bring a lot to the game when they come into a situation where they've been working in a more traditional environment of animation. I think people quickly realize that what they know from post, what they know from production, what they know from physical production is all applicable to a virtual production environment. What we're trying to do is to blend all of these skills together and to create a new workflow. So I think people are beginning to realize that they're not the barriers that they thought there were, that they can actually bring the skills that they have and then build on top of them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point too. It's there's this unique moment in the industry right now where nobody's an expert. We're all learning the engine. We're all learning new things on a daily basis, if not an hourly or a minute basis. Like, before we even started this panel, we were talking, and there's one little checkbox that always gets you. But it's that network of collaborators and creators that Epic has created that is really special, and it almost makes you feel like part of this ragtag family that you're trying to figure this new way, this new workflow out. And one of the bigger emphasis, at least when I'm looking for people that we want to have join our team, you're right, Connie, it's people that have an expertise somewhere else, but are also first and foremost passionate about the engine, but can also see what it can be. And that's not just VFX people, that's not animators. I mean, when, it broke my heart at the beginning of the pandemic, when you had over 900,000 film cast and crew members out of work in Los Angeles County alone. So this helps us bring all those people back into the flow of things. So, talking about bringing on DPs, but on our projects, we bring in, yes, the DPs. We're talking about bringing in our gaffers and creating that connective tissue. Our production designers are live action production designers because they can now see things in real time. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing, and people shouldn't be afraid because we're all learning at the same time and nobody's an expert. So, I think hiring is going to be, you just have to first and foremost love the engine. And I think that's what we're all in equal minds about too.
We're basically a content creating company, and it's just growing for us because it really doesn't make much of a difference. The kind of people that we're used to working with are the kind of people who would be working with previously or traditionally type of softwares that we're always using. So actually, it's a good time to talk about the first time we actually had to do this for reproduction, which was the Westworld case study, in which Connie called us because we're based in Spain and they had to digitize this backdrop for the Westworld sequences, which were based in Spain. And at first, there was one person in our company who had experience with Unreal Engine. And we were literally not certain, and I can say this now, that the project has been a success and we were able to complete it. We only had one person that was able to dig into Unreal Engine and had some experience working that. But then the rest of the artists, they just jumped on board and learned very quickly, and we completed the job at a top level of demand, and everybody was satisfied with it. So it's just, for us, it's not that it creates new opportunities in this particular sense, but it gives the artists and the technicians a bigger opportunity to grow. That's it.
So tell us a little bit about how that came together.
Yeah, so this has to do with some indoor scenes that were shot at a local studio here in Los Angeles. And it features backgrounds that are set in the City of Arts and Sciences in Valencia, Spain. So the talent was all here, and the schedule was that it needed to be shot here because of talent requirements. And traditionally, this would have been shot in green screen. You'd see through the windows of the office of the character would have been just a green screen. But the director and the DP and Jay Worth, the visual effects supervisor, decided that they wanted to use this technology so that it would provide both the director and the DP with more freedom. So they could be able to move around the camera, being able to see what's going on in real time. So Connie, who at the time was managing a 3D camera tracking facility, she thought that it would be a good idea to contact us, since we were based in Spain, to try and create an asset, like a model, for those backgrounds that could be projected onto the LED screens and be seen as they were shooting here in Los Angeles. So we went out in the field and we used a three-dimensional scanner, a LiDAR scanner, to digitize the environment. We created a point cloud and photogrammetry of the building and the landscape, much as like we would use in a traditional way of doing things. But this is where it started getting a little different from what we usually do. Normally, we would start creating an asset or a model that would prime detail over efficiency. But in this case, it was a little different because we needed to keep in mind that the model needed to move in real time as the camera was moving. So there was quite a bit of back and forth process in terms of optimizing what parts of the model we should be putting more detailing in, and which ones we should be creating in a lighter way so that the refresh rate would be more according to the needs of the camera that's moving around. So there was a lot of going back and forth and a lot of optimizing, and that was the main challenge that we had to face. And at the end of the day, we went through all this preparation that we'd mentioned before, and we came to this compromise between detail and image quality and being able to refresh it in real time, and it all worked out to everybody's satisfaction. We did not have any post-production applied to the shots, so what you see on the shots now is what you were seeing while you were shooting on set. So no post-production at all, which was the goal of it, and it's the ideal situation.
Super cool.
I think that the interesting thing was that they originally were going to go on location. They were going to take the entire crew to Spain, and they were talking about the logistics of doing that and the timing, and they were having a really hard time trying to figure that out. And when I heard that, I thought of El Ranchito, and I knew that Gonzalo was working in Los Angeles. And I said, hey, we just did The Mandalorian. I think we could do this. So I called Gonzalo and we started to look into it. And everyone who accomplished this was their first time to be setting up a location with photogrammetry and optimizing it using the engine for use on an LED wall. And I was really impressed with how everyone pulled it through, and we had a great product in the end.
Yeah, and it speaks also to the point that we were discussing before about how global everything has become, because all these back and forths and adjusting lighting, level of detail, geometry, whatever, it was done with the guys supervising over here in Los Angeles, and we working from Spain. So, it definitely is a testament to what's been going on.
It's so funny what you were talking about, Gonzalo, too, is that you're essentially creating, super high res, 50 feet in front of the camera lens, and then depending on traditional VFX techniques for the far distant things that are further away from camera. So it's not that much different of how we would have done it on a live action set. You create, your rocks and everything around your performers, and then everything else can fall off in detail. So it's
Absolutely.
The similarities are crazy to me from a live action world, but we're just applying it into our virtual.
The other beauty of it is that if you need to do pickup shots, you've got it. You can pull your actors in depending on their schedules, and you've got all the flexibility you need. So there are a number of different advantages to being able to use this technology.
Each of you has been in the visual effects space for a while, but you've also been on this bleeding edge of virtual production for a number of years. Can you talk a little bit about how things have evolved and, again, the tipping point that we're at now?
It's interesting because every project that you're on, what people want to accomplish is new. So whatever you've learned from the previous project, it's not to say that you're not going to replicate it. You do in some ways, but what's really interesting is you're constantly being pushed to try new things. And everyone is on that edge of maybe not having it work. And I think that's what makes it exciting. And it's always amazing to me the way people actually pull it together, and they draw from all different types of experience, and they work collectively to find solutions. Most recently, the fact that we all need to be planning ahead in the manner in which we do now, we need to know how to break this script down in ways that are meticulous, because you need to be prepared for production in ways that you didn't used to be. When you're working in real time, you can't just push things off to post-production. You need to be able to solve those problems on the day in real time with everyone on the set. So that means you need to be planning collectively in advance, using the VAD to try things out and to design your sets and to design your virtual environments so that they work cohesively together. And I think this is probably the biggest change that's happened, is the way in which all of us need to be able to anticipate things before they happen, and to be able to be ready with all kinds of different solutions on the day. And basically, by the time you're finished shooting, you've got a film about 90% in the can. So there's a huge reward for that, but it is requiring a different way of approaching the project.
We had a great group discussion about a month back, right before the holidays, with other companies involved that are all working in this new workflow. And what we kind of all agreed upon and found is that the live action workflow is essential into diving into this new world of virtual production. And I say that because in animation, traditional animation workflows, can sometimes take anywhere from 2 to 4 years, for an entire feature. And when you take people that are used to animation and you put them in a live action world, there is a huge disconnect in terms of language, just in general, about why we slate things, why we call or number things in certain scenes, or why we break down scripts the way we do. So It is going to change, and it is slowly changing. But I think the biggest thing is just creating that connective tissue, that's translation between not only animation and VFX, but animation, VFX, virtual production, live action, all these key components into our art form of filmmaking, and making sure that everyone is getting back to that basis of what is the story call for, and how can we all, using our knowledge base, create the best thing possible. So you bring up a good point. We need to get back into the century-year-old art of filmmaking again. Roll, action, and cut. And I think that's what it comes down to, all the preparation again, too.
Yeah, it's absolutely about the preparation. In our experience, before it used to be the famous saying, well, let's fix it in post. Now it's not that. Now, all the back and forth that goes on between filmmakers and visual effects people and the artists, before it used to happen after the film was shot, now it has to be before. There's a lot of testing, there's a lot of back and forth, there's a lot of adjusting, there's a lot of optimizing in terms of how heavy the geometry that we create is in terms of the assets, or previous lighting or whatever. That has to do before, so that when the shoot happens, the director has the freedom to shoot with whatever he's seeing at the moment. So yeah, it is about preparation, really.
Connie, can you elaborate just for a moment for anyone that's never heard of the VAD, just what that is exactly?
Well, the VAD is the Virtual Art Department. The reason for the VAD is to be able to create physical set pieces, props, all the physical environment that is designed together with the virtual environment. So as the virtual environments are being built, there is a production designer that needs to understand both worlds, essentially. And Andrew Jones, for example, who is the production designer for The Mandalorian, is probably one of the best in the industry. And the reason for that is because he understands the virtual environment and the physical environment equally. And he's able to design sets with that in mind. When you're working on an LED volume, it's really important that the physical environment is blended seamlessly with the virtual background, and that sets are built with the perspective in mind. And all of this requires a kind of eye to the design that is specific to this kind of workflow. So that's the need for a VAD, and you need to employ a VAD very early in the process, because just like what we've been talking about, the preparation is crucial to the success of the project, and that requires that both the physical and virtual environments are planned simultaneously together in the workflow.
And also kind of coming back to that, Connie, as well, it's not just the production design, but what we've actually found that works well is involving our DPs, just like you guys probably do early on. And we'll have a gray shaded environment, and we'll call it exactly what it is. It's a stage walkthrough. What we would do in a live action set or a movie or TV show, when just the scaffolding's up, the walls are in place, and then the DP and the production designer will walk through, say, oh, a sconce could look, be good there. Oh, we should probably punch a hole in this wall because it's dark. But we're now doing that in the virtual world with the use of our VAD, who's located in New Zealand. And now with remote workflows, half of our VAD is in New Zealand and half of our VAD is in Vancouver, and they're all working on the same environments together. But yeah, it's that preparation, just coming back to it is crucial.
I think what's also important is that you're developing your pipeline at that point. All of the pieces that go into creating a pipeline can be started with the VAD. You can work out every step of the process in a virtual scouting session, just like you're saying, with a DP on site, and you can work out your entire pipeline in advance of the shoot.
We've talked about this a little already, and we're obviously taking advantage of it right now for this panel, but the ability to do meaningful remote collaboration is very relevant in the age of COVID. How has that ability impacted your productions and your workflow?
as almost everybody else in the industry, we've had to work from home, and that's given us the possibility to expand a lot because our offices are the main offices in Madrid in Spain, and we have a second office in Barcelona. And now we have artists all over Spain, really, without really any kind of regard to where they're based on, because they're working remotely. So that's key, really. And the interactivity of being able to use the engine with any of our projects, it's really a plus for us. So we can only say good things.
Yeah, I was happily surprised with the work from home situation. I mean, what it did is it broke down the idea of a physical office space in general. And it actually allowed us and our hiring teams to go out there with no preconceived notions that they need to be in Vancouver, they need to be in LA only. But now we can hire on a global scale and go after those amazing artists because now it's not that the facilities have the best machines anymore. I mean, most of our artists that are working from home and working off Teradici and their own machines blow my computer out of the water. I mean, it's just becoming that accessible. And I think in a collaborative nature, I have more FaceTime with our team in New Zealand than I think I would have ever in a physical office, to be quite honest, because we're just on Zooms and drawing on screens, and you're in a virtual world. So I've actually found it quite productive. And with the use of so many remote multi-user tools with teams all around the world, you can actually have them, have all the artists working at different times. And then, this was a quote from one of our artists that woke up in Vancouver, and it's like, oh my goodness, on Monday, the entire left side of the set was completely set dressed because our team in New Zealand, who were a day ahead, had all that time. And so it was great. So we found a very collaborative way to make this work from home situation work. And I think it's going to be a hybrid approach in the future.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting the way the pandemic has kind of given people permission. It's kind of changed our psychology about the way we can work virtually. And I think there were barriers before where people weren't necessarily accepting of it. However, now I have to admit, there are times when I can't remember if I've actually met someone that I'm working with, because the workflow is so seamless and we've gotten so comfortable with the ability to work from wherever we live, and the tools that are available with Epic's technology, with multi-user. I think this is the way we're going to work in the future. This is opening doors for everyone. It's allowing us to be more diverse with our workforce. It's allowing us to find talent in places that we never could have before. And I think it's just opening up a world that's going to be completely new and exciting for everyone going forward.
And just to add there, I just remember before the pandemic, it was so hard to get anyone on a video call. The idea of it was so foreign, but now everyone's an expert. They can annotate, they can share a screen. They're giving you advice on, did you see that checkbox to stream normally and sound? So I think you're right. Everything is shifted now, and everyone's a little bit more technically savvy when we went into this.
Assume the health crisis magically disappears tomorrow. What do you expect from this experience we move forward with and keep in place, and what do we discard and go back to the way we did things prior to all this?
I don't think so. I think the addition of so much that allows us to do things virtually has been very liberating. I think it's opened all kinds of opportunities, and it's not to say that we don't want to get together in person again. I think everyone's really anxious to be working on a set again together without a face mask and a shield. But I think also we're not going to stop. We're going to continue to work together with people around the world and include them in the process.
I agree with you, Connie. I think the industry has changed as a whole. And like I said, it's going to be this hybrid approach of people that want to go into the office and but also just people working from home. It's going to be interesting, but I think some people want to escape back to the office, but some people are completely content.
Yeah, for us, for example, it depends on the kind of work you're doing. Like we still have half of the workforce working from home in Spain, and the other half is working at the office. And we mostly like the compositors to be working at the office because they need to be working on the monitor. I mean, you can't really trust the calibration of the monitors that people have at home. So when it's some fine kind of work that you have to do, it's advisable to be at a place where you have the material. But it definitely gives you, before it used to be an obligation to be at the office. Now it's not. It's sort of an option. And then it'll give people more flexibility and more freedom, which I think is what it's all about, right?
I also think that, because of the use of companies like Amazon, we have our directors directing motion capture shoots that are in New York. And what we do is we have this packaged shopping list that we send them to set up an entire remote viewing station that they plug into our stage. They have a huge TV that has 4 quad cameras on it and a real-time feed, and it's all our directors for all our shows are just zooming in and actually directing from afar, which isn't that far off from when we worked on a Tintin comic. That was very much their norm.
Yeah. Well, that was very early days when we had Peter Jackson streaming into the stage, working with Steven Spielberg, and the two of them were directing the movie at the same time. And every once in a while, we'd forget that Peter was there, and he'd be yelling at us on the screen. I think we've come a long way since then, and I think now it's just an integral part of the way we all work together.
What about protection of IP? Because I know my understanding is that for many years there was a lot of resistance on the part of studios just to do these kinds of remote workflows because they were afraid that if content were moved off of their internal networks, there would be more piracy, or that it would lead to ideas being stolen. I mean, has that been mitigated to the point where it's just no longer a concern anymore, or is that still a key piece of the?
Oh, no, it is a concern. It really is a concern. And well, the way we deal with it is we have all the information centralized at the offices. So we do not bring content to our remote machines. We work in, the remote posts are terminals. We're actually working on the machines that we have at the office, and they're completely protected and firewalled and everything. So, and that's what I understand most people are doing at this point, because yes, it is a concern by every studio, and you can't, let any of these kind of high-priced contents leak out. So it is certainly a concern, and it's addressed by doing that.
Absolutely, that's the same thing that we're doing on our end as well. It's obviously you'll always run the risk of people working from home and videotaping their screens, but I think there has been a lot of technological hurdles overcome in this new age, especially with security. So yeah, that's how matching what Gonzalo was saying. That's how we do it as well. Yeah.
It's a concern. Just there's no doubt about it. But I think there's all kinds of solutions that are working very well, and people seem to be satisfied with how things are set up.
Where do each of you see virtual production evolving over the next few years in terms of the technology and the workflow, and what could it ultimately evolve into?
Yeah, that's a loaded.
Wow. That's the question. That's $1 million question, because things are growing so fast that if you go 5 years back, none of this was happening at all, and now all of a sudden we're shooting in real time on sets. And I mean, where's it going? Let your imagination run wild, because you're not going to get as far as reality is going to go. Really, it's like, I don't know, like definitely characters interacting with real live actors. That sort of thing is happening already. So it's happening more. It's going to happen more and more. So I mean, I'm just afraid to even try to guess.
No, absolutely. I definitely, it's changing on on a daily basis with every iteration of the engine that's coming out, with every Unreal hobbyist from anywhere from China to Japan I mean, the community of Unreal artists in the world of just hobbyists as well, they're finding new things every second of every day. And you can, we have this Unreal Slack channel at the studio, and we have our artists constantly, did you see this? Did you see that? Did you see that? So even if you're right, Gonzalo, even if we try to predict, I don't know where it's going to go, because, the idea that, matte painting, if you had a wide open landscape and you wanted to make it the most beautiful sunset ever, the idea was that you had to do a matte painting. Now, as of less than a year ago, you can literally go in and paint your ideal sunset within the engine. So when I saw that, that was one of the things I saw, and my mind was blown yet again. So yeah, you're right. I just don't know where it's going to go. I think, honestly, our imagines are whatever we can think of is frankly quite possible now.
Yeah, because these guys at Epic, they keep surprising us. So I don't know if, Connie, you have any insider predictions.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking today because our Digital Human Initiative was launched today. And that is definitely going to be the future for digital human technology. I don't know, where that will go, but it's going to give us all kinds of opportunities. It's only going to get better. I think what's really interesting is that Epic is helping to develop a holistic ecosystem where everyone as a community is able to contribute to these changes. And I think that's what we're talking about, is the ability for every single person to be involved in making this a better experience for all of us. And it's a different type of competitive atmosphere. It's something that isn't based on proprietary closed source types of solutions. This is based on a platform that's open source and available to everyone. And I think the sky's the limit on what we can do with that.
No, and it's also so great, that we are talking on in a platform much like this, but there's so many curated events that Epic holds, just like the fellowship, but even sometimes mixers from people that are kind of leading this charge. And it's so great to just also, just kind of cry together, but also achieve, celebrate together once you've achieved something. Because there is that, I love that about Epic. I love that there's that holistic mentality and this collaborative nature. I remember when they announced that Unreal was free, and I remember that visual, and I thought that was, I remember it was just being like, this is going to be a game changer. And look what has been, accomplished, and since then to now, it's incredible. And I think us as, some of the leaders in this workflow now, it's kind of our responsibility now to translate that and create an open creative network within our companies, but also be free to share that technology and knowledge and that troubleshooting, because it'll only make us stronger at the end of the day. And have everyone on speed dial, because that, I feel like that's how we create the best imagery, the best experiences, and also have fun while we're doing it. Because what's the use of going to work if you're not having fun? I think this is a great opportunity for us to collaborate together and grow stronger relationships too.
How about the actual way content is consumed? I mean, today people are playing games on their desktop, they're playing games on mobile devices, they're watching video on screens. And there's also, kind of a niche market for people who are looking at things in VR headsets. I mean, do you see a moment in the future where those things kind of, evolve into something even more interactive? I mean, obviously, we all know things that are in the pipeline, but where does that kind of leave people who are creating this content? What can they kind of expect to do for those new platforms in the future?
I think the future for interactive content is definitely coming up soon. I think no longer will we be mainly looking at a kind of passive type of entertainment with film and television. And I think gaming coming into that arena has opened the door for a more interactive experience ultimately. And I think the fact that the engine is able to create an environment where all of these assets can be created and shared across all these different platforms is definitely what we're going to see within the next 2-3 years for sure.
Yeah, I also think that the gaming industry as a whole, everyone's a gamer. I mean, everyone at least has one game on their phone. And if you say you don't, you're lying because everyone has played Candy Crush or anything like that. But I think that gaming has become the next norm. And with the ability to also communicate and interact with people, that network has been there for a long time. And yeah, I just think we're just tapping into what gamers have known for a long time, that, we can play games across the world and connect with people and have friends across the world and create a virtual community. But yeah, I do agree with you, Connie, that going to progress beyond a passive experience and get into a more collaborative relationship type experience, especially with the use of all these virtual worlds at the helm of it.
I think an example is what Fortnite just recently did by hosting a music festival inside the game. I think this is just the beginning of what we're going to start to see with a cross-pollination of both types of media. And I think it's really exciting where this can go.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the real-time crowd tool that you've been developing?
This is a software that we've been developing. We have quite a bit of experience doing crowds and visual effects. Like, for example, the work that we did in Game of Thrones, it was mostly the crowd that had to do with the Army of the Dead for, the show's followers. Well, there might be quite a few. If you're into visual effects, chances are you've watched at least a few episodes of Game of Thrones. So we did all of the winter armies. Up until recently, it was all done in traditional ways of working, like different softwares. And then we started thinking that it might be a good idea to develop a system in which we could create crowds in real time. And that coincided with the beginning of the pandemic. And as we all know, at the start of this, there were sporting events that were happening or not happening. And if they were happening, obviously they were going to happen without audiences in the stands. So one of the big, and I can't say the name, sorry again, but it's not hard to figure out. But one of the big soccer clubs in Spain contacted us asking about the possibility of maybe recreating in real time crowds to be able to be, screened as the matches are broadcast. And we developed this system with them. We have not used it so far, but as you can see in the clip, it really works very well. And you can, it has lots of possibilities thanks to the flexibility of Unreal Engine. We can have adjustments to the behavior of the crowd. We can, have them react to cues that we give them. Even there's an experiment that we're doing that allows the movement of the crowds to be triggered by real-time events that has to do with sound. Like, say there's a bunch of fans that are watching the game on TV at their homes, and whenever they scream, the crowds will do something physically. So it's kind of an interesting experience. We're hoping that at some point we'll be able to put it to work. But as I'm saying now, it's just a work in progress thing, and I'm not allowed to disclose much more than this.
All right, fair enough. What's cool about these tools is that since they do lend themselves to kind of remote collaboration, multi-user environments, can you talk a little bit about the ways in which, for example, you could create content completely remotely where no one's ever in the same physical space together, but you could still shoot stuff?
Yeah, it's crazy because, just coming off of shooting an entire 8-episode series, 30 minutes an episode with a family of performers, on a show that we just wrapped, I can tell you it's completely doable. So a lot of you may have seen that video, that demo video from Epic, where a person was in a mocap suit and they were able to all the other team members remoted in to control the other workstations. That's exactly what we were doing on our other shows. So we had 4 mocap performers with head rigs and XN suits in one smaller location. And we only had 2 additional crew members on set. Everyone else, including the AD, the director, all our environment artists and production designers, were all zooming in on one Zoom. And we were able to shoot an entire series. And this is an entire series populating a town, an entire cast and character list of up to 75 people, all with 4 people that are contained within the same household. So it's not just a theory anymore. You can actually do this workflow safely and with a minimal crew.
I understand you've also been doing some development work in kind of bridging the virtual gap between real lighting instruments on a set and how they are represented in the engine. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So on one of our current projects that we can't really disclose right now, we are working with an amazing cinematographer, Dan Mindell, who you may know from Star Trek, Star Wars, used to work for Tony Scott. He has a laundry list of films and iconic films that it's extremely long. But one of the things that we found was that when we first started navigating through the engine, and he said, bring up a light, he had no idea what a point light is and any of these built-in lights that were available within the engine. And I thought, it's not his job to learn what these technical lights are. It's our jobs as the technicians to create a cohesive language to bridge that gap. And I know this has been exercised before, but I'll share a little bit of imagery of what we were developing for use in the editor in the Unreal Engine. So we essentially got these schematics from Ares' website and matched the IES profiles to all these lights and created that translation. So now if Dan went in and said, I would like an 18K, we can have that on standby, roll it in. If he says, I want to put a scrim in there, we can put it in, add a softbox, same thing. So that connective tissue between the VFX side and actually live action is definitely our responsibility to do. So this is something that we are creating and we're constantly building so that we can really involve all those amazing on-set technicians. And this is not only for DPs, can also be for gaffers, dimmer board operators as well. This is just a still image of our team and how remote sessions work. Wenji down here is from New York. Dan's in Hawaii. Patrick up top is in Florida. I'm in LA. Roz in New Zealand. So this is how we do our tool review sessions in a remote workflow in a pandemic.
And just so people understand, so basically what you're saying is that a cinematographer who has very clearly in his mind or her mind how different lights affect a real scene and are used to calling up for a particular light. And this gives them the ability to look at a virtual scene and say, instead of just an abstract, give me a bright light, intensity, whatever over here, they can literally call the exact light that they're thinking of in the real world.
Exactly. They've spent, most of their careers and lifetimes becoming perfectionists of what they do. And there's this really great collaborative moment that when you're on a call with them and you're speaking with the opposite side, which are CG lighters, we have one of our artists, Andy, who's been a lighter for, 30 years. And he was paired with Dan and they sat together, and in 1 hour session, Andy walked out of there and he's like, I don't know what I've been doing for the last 30 years. Because my entire perception about why you light things the way you light things, where everything needs to be visible, is so ingrained into your mindset. And then the first thing that Dan did was like, let it fall off into the shadows. Let it go dark. It's beautiful. It's called contrast. So it was really something magical to see. And it just reiterated the fact that we just need to bridge that gap in terms of, and if it's just a matter of creating tools and calling it something that someone else is familiar with, then by all means, let's do it. And let's get more of these creative people that have helped shape cinema as a whole into our process, because ultimately everyone just benefits, And our next endeavor is to get into lensing things accurately. So it's a little bit of a secret project, but we're also taking a lot of the same visual effects techniques that we would use for live action shows and VFX shows, mapping lenses, but going to the 100th degree of that and making sure that we're accurately representing vintage lenses of a variety of makes and anamorphic, spherical, everything. So it's an exciting time, but I'm on a mission to really bridge that gap.
Right on. I want to thank Connie, Jason, and Gonzalo for joining us today, and I really hope you enjoyed their lessons from the front lines of virtual production. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noah.